In just 47 seconds, 17 dead Californians and $3.6 billion in approved rate increases were about to destroy the political career of a governor who claimed to fight corporate greed while taking their money. Gavin Newsom didn't expect wildfire victims in the hearing room. He didn't expect financial records linking his campaign to PG&E executives. Cameras captured the moment a widow held her husband's photograph and asked a question that had no acceptable answer. The Senate chamber watched as death and profit margins collided on live television. What did that widow reveal about who Newsom truly protected that made even his own party abandon him in real time? November 7, 2025, 3:21 in the afternoon. California State Senate Energy Committee hearing room, Sacramento. The late autumn light filtered through tall windows as Governor Gavin Newsom entered with the confidence of someone who had survived bigger political storms. He wore a charcoal suit, California flag pin on his lapel, briefing documents about necessary infrastructure investment prepared and ready. What he didn't know was that sitting in the gallery were 11 people whose lives had been destroyed by the very company he had just enriched, and they had evidence that would end his career. The hearing had been called to examine California's electricity crisis. Rates had reached 38 cents per kilowatt hour, making California's electricity the most expensive in the continental United States. Texas residents paid 12 cents per kilowatt hour. That meant California families were paying 317% more for the same electricity. And unlike Texas, California was experiencing rolling blackouts, aging infrastructure, and catastrophic wildfires caused by utility equipment. But the real scandal wasn't just high rates. It was who benefited from those rates while Californians died. Senator Jessica Ramirez, a moderate Democrat from San Diego, had spent 4 months investigating the connection between PG&E's rate increases, their executive compensation, their equipment failures, and Governor Newsom's approval of their pricing structure. What she had discovered would redefine corporate capture of state government. The morning session had covered technical testimony about grid modernization and renewable energy mandates. PG&E executives testified about necessary investments requiring rate increases. Industry consultants presented studies showing California's unique challenges justified premium pricing. Standard utility hearing procedure that would normally generate minimal public attention. Then Senator Ramirez began her questioning at 3:21 p.m. She didn't start with technical grid specifications or renewable portfolio standards. She started with a photograph that filled every screen in the chamber. A burnt landscape, charred tree stumps, the skeletal remains of what had been a home, reduced to ash and twisted metal. The image was devastating in its totality of destruction. Governor Newsom, Ramirez began, her voice carrying controlled emotion. This photograph was taken on August 19, 2023, in Mariposa County. This was the home of Robert and Catherine Chen. Do you know what caused this fire? Newsom's prepared remarks about infrastructure investments suddenly felt grotesquely inadequate. Senator, I'm aware that Mariposa County experienced wildfire damage in 2023. But specific causation analysis would need to. PG&E equipment, Ramirez interrupted with surgical precision. Specifically, a corroded transmission line that PG&E's own inspection records show had been flagged for replacement in 2019. That replacement was delayed because PG&E allocated maintenance funds to executive bonuses instead. The fire killed 17 people, including Robert Chen. She clicked to the next image. A man's face, kind eyes, warm smile, wearing a veteran's cap. Robert Chen, 72 years old, Vietnam veteran, retired teacher, burned to death in his home because PG&E chose executive compensation over equipment maintenance. The chamber fell silent. This wasn't abstract policy discussion anymore. This was about a man who died because a corporation prioritized profit over safety. Governor Newsom, Ramirez continued, 6 weeks after Robert Chen's death, you approved a 13% rate increase for PG&E. That rate increase generates $3.6 billion in additional annual revenue for the company whose equipment killed him. Can you explain that decision? Newsom shifted uncomfortably. Senator, rate approvals go through the Public Utilities Commission, which operates independently based on infrastructure needs and Governor, the PUC commissioners are appointed by you, Ramirez interrupted. 3 of the 5 current commissioners were your appointees. You control the PUC. So I'll ask again, why did you approve a $3.6 billion rate increase for a company that killed 17 Californians through negligent maintenance? The question exposed the fiction of regulatory independence. Newsom appointed the regulators who approved PG&E's rates. The buck stopped with him. Senator, rate structures are based on complex financial modeling that considers infrastructure replacement schedules, renewable energy integration costs, and operational overhead. Let's examine that operational overhead, Ramirez said, pulling out a financial document marked with official letterhead. This is PG&E's executive compensation report filed with the SEC. Over the past 5 years, PG&E has paid $13.5 billion in executive bonuses and stock compensation. She let that number hang in the air. $13.5 billion to executives while equipment corroded and Californians burned. Governor, PG&E's CEO made $27.3 million last year. That's 700 times what the average PG&E line worker earned. That's more than Robert Chen earned in his entire 40-year teaching career. And you approved rate increases that fund this executive compensation while California families pay 38 cents per kilowatt hour. Newsom attempted his standard deflection about free market compensation and attracting talented leadership, but Ramirez had more devastating evidence ready. Let's talk about those rate comparisons, Governor. She displayed a chart showing electricity rates across all 50 states. California's bar towered over every other state except Hawaii. 38 cents per kilowatt hour in California, 12 cents in Texas, 14 cents in Nevada, 15 cents in Arizona. All our neighboring states with similar climate conditions pay less than half what Californians pay. Why? Newsom fell back on talking points about California's renewable energy mandates and environmental leadership, but Ramirez was ready for that deflection too. Governor, Washington state has similar renewable energy mandates. Their rates are 9 cents per kilowatt hour. Oregon has comparable environmental standards, 11 cents per kilowatt hour. California's high rates aren't because of environmental policy. They're because you've allowed PG&E to operate as an unaccountable monopoly that charges whatever they want while their equipment kills people. The moral clarity was devastating. This wasn't about complex energy policy. This was about a captured government allowing a corporation to price gouge customers while maintaining infrastructure so poorly that people died. But here's what really demonstrates your complicity, Governor, Ramirez said, pulling out another document. This is a campaign finance report showing PG&E executive donations to your campaigns. Over the past 7 years, PG&E executives and their families have donated $4.2 million to your various political committees. The number connected the dots between rate approvals and political donations. Newsom had received millions from the company he was supposed to regulate, then approved rate increases that made them billions. $4.2 million in donations, Ramirez repeated slowly. Then you appointed PUC commissioners who approved $3.6 billion in rate increases. That's an 857-to-1 return on investment. No wonder they keep donating to you. Newsom's face reddened. Senator, legal campaign contributions don't influence regulatory decisions. The insinuation that, Governor, let me introduce you to someone, Ramirez interrupted, gesturing to the gallery. A woman stood slowly. She was in her late 60s, wearing a simple black dress, holding a framed photograph against her chest. Her face showed the kind of grief that never fully heals. This was Catherine Chen, Robert's widow. Mrs. Chen lost her husband in the fire caused by PG&E's equipment failure, Ramirez explained. She's here today because she has a question for you, Governor. Mrs. Chen, would you like to address Governor Newsom? Catherine Chen walked to the microphone position for public testimony. Her hands trembled as she held her husband's photograph. For several seconds, she simply stood there, grief making speech impossible. Then she found her voice. Governor Newsom, she said, her voice breaking, this is Robert. We were married for 47 years. He survived Vietnam. He taught 3rd grade for 37 years. He coached Little League. He volunteered at the VA hospital. She paused, tears streaming down her face, but her voice grew stronger. On August 19, 2023, he burned to death in our home because PG&E's equipment failed. The coroner said he died from smoke inhalation before the flames reached him. That's supposed to make me feel better. It doesn't. The chamber was absolutely silent. Even the court reporters had stopped typing, transfixed by her testimony. 6 weeks after my husband died, Catherine continued, you approved a rate increase for PG&E, $3.6 billion more in profit for the company that killed him. My electricity bill went from $212 per month to $287 per month. I'm now paying more money to the company whose equipment murdered my husband. The word murdered hit like a gunshot. This wasn't corporate negligence anymore. This was a widow calling it what it was. I want you to look at his face, Catherine said, holding the photograph toward Newsom. Look at my husband, the man who died because PG&E chose bonuses over maintenance, the man whose death you rewarded with a rate increase. 47 seconds of testimony. That's all it took. 47 seconds of a widow holding her husband's photograph and asking a question that had no politically acceptable answer. Governor Newsom, Catherine said, her voice now carrying moral authority that filled the chamber. Why did you approve a rate increase for the company that killed my husband? Why am I paying them more money? Why are their executives getting millions in bonuses? And why did you take $4.2 million from them while Californians burned? The questions hung in the air like an indictment. Newsom's mouth opened but no words emerged. What could he possibly say that wouldn't sound obscene in the face of such grief? Mrs. Chen, I am deeply sorry for your loss, Newsom finally managed, his voice strained. The tragedy of wildfire losses is something that I didn't ask for sympathy, Catherine interrupted with unexpected force. I asked for an explanation. Why did you reward the company that killed my husband? Ramirez let the question hang for several brutal seconds before adding her own follow-up. Governor, can you answer Mrs. Chen's question? Why did you approve rate increases for a company that killed 17 Californians through negligent maintenance? Newsom attempted to retreat behind regulatory process and technical justifications, but Catherine Chen wasn't finished. Governor, I brought something else, she said, pulling papers from a folder. This is my electricity bill from last month. $287 for 900 kilowatt hours. I did the math. That's 31.8 cents per kilowatt hour. My sister lives in Nevada. She paid $118 for the same amount of electricity. I'm paying $169 more per month than she is for the same electricity. She held up the bills for cameras to capture clearly. The visual comparison was damning. That's $2,028 more per year, Catherine continued. I'm a retired school librarian, Governor. My pension is fixed. That $2,028 is my annual grocery budget. I'm now choosing between eating and paying the company that killed my husband for electricity that costs 3 times more than it should. The human cost of rate increases had a face and a voice. This wasn't abstract economic policy. This was a widow choosing between food and electricity. Senator Ramirez seized the moment. Governor, Mrs. Chen's situation isn't unique. California has 11 million households paying inflated electricity rates that fund PG&E executive bonuses while infrastructure crumbles. How do you justify this system? Newsom's response was a masterclass in political evasion. He talked about energy transition challenges, grid modernization requirements, and the complexity of utility regulation. He expressed sympathy for wildfire victims while defending the necessity of rate structures that attracted capital investment. But Catherine Chen cut through the political language with devastating simplicity. Governor, you took their money. You approved their rate increases. You're protecting them instead of us. That's not complex. That's corruption. The word corruption coming from a grieving widow rather than a political opponent carried nuclear force. This wasn't partisan attack. This was moral judgment from someone who had paid the ultimate price for regulatory capture. The hearing concluded 40 minutes later, but the damage was complete and irreversible. By that evening, video of Catherine Chen's 47 seconds of testimony had been viewed 83 million times. The image of a widow holding her husband's photograph while asking why Newsom approved rate increases for the company that killed him became the defining symbol of regulatory failure. Within 72 hours, 3 PUC commissioners resigned. 5 Democratic state senators called for investigation into Newsom's campaign finance ties to PG&E, and Catherine Chen received calls from 46 other wildfire victims who wanted to tell their stories of loss while paying increased rates to the companies that destroyed their lives. The PG&E rate scandal destroyed Newsom's carefully cultivated image as a consumer advocate who fought corporate power. The evidence was too clear. $4.2 million in campaign donations from PG&E executives, $3.6 billion in approved rate increases, 17 dead Californians, $13.5 billion in executive bonuses, and a widow paying $287 per month to the company whose equipment killed her husband. Sometimes the most powerful political weapons aren't complex financial forensics or legal violations. Sometimes they're just a widow holding a photograph and asking why profit mattered more than her husband's life. Gavin Newsom had built a political career on progressive rhetoric about holding corporations accountable and protecting working families. But when forced to choose between PG&E's campaign donations and Catherine Chen's husband, he chose the money. And 47 seconds of testimony exposed the choice for the moral failure it was. The numbers told one story: 38 cents per kilowatt hour versus 12 cents, 317% higher rates, 4.2 million in donations buying 3.6 billion in rate increases. But Catherine Chen's testimony told the real story: power and money protecting each other while ordinary Californians burned. In the end, 17 deaths, 1 widow's testimony, and 47 seconds of truth proved stronger than years of political spin. Because some questions have no acceptable answers. And why did you reward the company that killed my husband, was one of them.